someone is of affluence, what are we talking about? Okay, so it's a type of significance. Think economics. Okay, wealthy. That's a good way to put it. So if we're saying affluent society, talking about the 1950s, what major event in world history occurred in the 1940s? We were at war. What was that war? World War II, right? So all of our resources, people, they're all dedicated to fighting in this war. The 1950s comes, we've been out of war for 5, 10 years, and we're in an affluent society because we have created this huge economy in the United States. And now we're finally starting to profit from some of that major buildup, right? During the Korean War, who was the president? Do you guys remember?
Korean War?
Truman, right? So we talked about he had a kind of a fight with General MacArthur, lost some of his popularity, right? So his successor, he did not run for re-election. His successor was Dwight Eisenhower. And Dwight Eisenhower brings in this era of the affluent society. When we think of presidents, sometimes what makes a good president sometimes doesn't even determine like what it is that they actually did. In the case of Dwight Eisenhower, things were really good in the United States. Directly or indirectly because of Eisenhower, we don't know. But we know that the economy was booming. So he was also a modern Republican, and this idea of modern republicanism came up, which is essentially the idea that Dwight Eisenhower was socially liberal, but he was economically conservative. Any guesses about what that might mean? To be socially liberal but economically conservative.
So you're fiscally conservative, meaning you want to keep the budget, like the spending in a minimum, but you want people to have more rights.
That's a really good way to put it in a couple of sentences. So yeah, keeping the budget tight, being conservative with money, but also allowing people to live freely, have rights. So some of this policy that he institutes as president becomes known as this modern republicanism. And that was his approach to how things were doing in the United States. So we just watched Good Night and Good Luck, right? It was about the Red Scare, McCarthyism. What's kind of the overall tone of that film? Is it really positive or is it kind of bleak?
Very tense.
Okay, very tense. So not super upbeat, right? Well, here's the thing I want to get across to you, is that even though McCarthyism is happening in the early part of the 50s, like, not everyone is feeling that tense. Not everyone is feeling like this overwhelming fear and pressure. That's kind of the government, the news, that kind of side of things. Like here in the United States today, not everyone is consumed with some of the pressures of our government, right? Some people just live their lives day to day. They have a good life, they have a good job, go to school, have good friends. Like, your life isn't consumed with a fear, right? Well, in the 50s, that's the case too. So even though McCarthyism is going on, there's a whole other side of the coin in which people are actually like really living life and things are good. And so along comes Eisenhower, and he's here like to establish he's running the wave a little bit, riding the wave of the economic prosperity. He's creating new departments within the executive branch, so like the Department of Education, Department of Health, those kind of things. And he's just kind of riding that wave. So I'm going to show you a political ad from Eisenhower, and I want you to kind of pay attention and see how it connects to this idea of the affluent society.
Everybody likes Ike for president. Hang out the banner and keep the gun. We'll take Ike to Washington. We don't want John or Dean or Harry. Let's do that big jump right. Let's get in step with the guy that's left. Get in step with our own heart. You like Ike, I like Ike. Everybody likes Ike for president. Hang out the banner and keep the gun. We'll take Ike to Washington. We got to get where we are going. Travel day and night for president. Let Adelaide go the other way. We'll all go with Ike. You like Ike, I like Ike. Everybody likes Ike for president. Hang out the banner, beat the drum. We'll take Ike to Washington. We'll take Ike to Washington.
Now is the time for all good Americans to come to the aid of their country.
Ike for president, Ike for president, Ike for president.
Okay, so how does this campaign ad relate to what we're talking about with the way that America's going? Why is it appropriate?
So they were like talking about rallying people to come, like support the cause of defending your country and your beliefs.
Okay, what kind of people were in the ad?
All like really happy middle class people.
There were happy middle class people. Did you notice any like specific types of people? Like, okay, there was Uncle Sam, yeah. There were like farmers, doctors, military. Like everybody's coming together because they like Ike. So if it's an affluent society where things are good, why does that ad make sense? Why is it effective?
Because it's showing how he can keep you happy. Like
Okay.
if you're living, like if you're already happy, he can keep it that way.
Yeah, exactly. Like, if you're president and you want to get votes, just have everybody think things are good, and I'm going to keep it good, right? I like Ike. You like Ike. Everybody likes Ike because things are good. And today's campaign ads, do you see a lot of that?
Oh no.
I
No?
wish they were more like that.
A little more upbeat, catchy, yeah. What kind of things do you see?
Well,
Them ripping on each other?
Okay, there's a lot of the ripping on each other, yeah?
Yeah, it's mostly just like the people running against each other, just bad mouthing the other one.
Mm-hmm.
Mostly saying they're gonna fix the mistakes that are going on now.
Yeah. Yeah, so finding the flaws in each other. And that was totally going on with McCarthyism, right? Like, they're out to get each other, all that stuff. But at the same time, like, you have this whole other side of our community that was just like, I feel good and I don't want anybody to tell me otherwise. And so, vote for Ike because he's gonna make you feel good, right? Okay, so the economic boom of the 1950s. Development of the middle class. So I heard somebody talk about the middle class already. How would you define that? Class in the middle. Yeah.
You make good money, but like you don't make a lot where you can just spend on whatever, but you don't have to budget as much as like poor people do.
Okay. So you're not extremely wealthy, but you're also not extremely poor, right? You're in the middle. I would venture to say that a lot of us are kind of in that. Our families are middle class. Like, we don't spend every day meal to meal, wondering what, are we going to be able to eat? But we're also not like, where am I going to take my private jet today? We're just kind of in that middle class. So automation in the workplace. So things are developing at a rapid pace because of automation. Does anybody know what that is? What is automation?
Do you mean like the assembly line?
So
For
assembly lines, machines. So if you have automation in the workplace, what does that allow you to do?
Make more
Work
progress.
faster.
So you're able to manufacture things a lot quicker, right? Not everything is handmade. You have people that are hired to make sure that the machines are working right, but they're not necessarily making things themselves. They're operating the machines. So that process of automation makes it greatly increases productivity, right? You also have the development of pink-collar jobs. Pink-collar jobs are jobs that are traditionally done by women. If we're thinking 1950s, what are traditional pink-collar jobs? Teachers?
nurses.
Nurses? Flight attendants? Waitresses? Think of all the stereotypical female jobs. That was a pink-collar job in the 50s. Has anybody ever seen this episode of I Love Lucy? I see a couple of nods. So I Love Lucy, show about middle-class American family. Lucy and her husband Ricky, they decide to switch and swap kind of their role in the household. So she's the housewife, right? She takes care of the home, and he's the breadwinner. Well, they decide to switch. And so he stays at home, he makes the meals, he cleans the house, she goes out and gets a job. And because it's the 1950s, she has to get a pink-collar job. So in this episode, essentially she's working on a conveyor, like a line where she's putting chocolate into wrappers, and chocolate is coming down way faster than she can wrap it, and so she starts eating it. And so what happens is, like, her supervisor comes in and she's really impressed at how productive they're being, so she tells them to speed it up, and so more and more chocolate comes, and she's eating more than she can handle. And just kind of this idea of, you know, that when women were in the workplace, that was kind of, at the time, it was a little bit on the edge, right? Maybe women can't handle these jobs. And that was kind of, what are we going to do to break some of those stereotypes? Also in the 1950s is the baby boom. I know you guys have probably heard of this. Does anybody know specifically what the baby boom is?
Bunch of babies.
Bunch of babies.
Being born.
A bunch of old people. So my parents were baby boomers. That's right. So you're off in World War II. You're a man fighting. You went off to war, you were 18. Now you're like 23. You come back. What's your mind on? Getting busy, right? Find a wife. Have a family. So in the 1950s, you have this huge spike in the amount of people that are in the country. You have these families that start popping up. Young kids, right? So if you have a huge influx of people, what do you need more of? Homes. Exactly right. With increase in population, you need increase in housing. Well, in the 1950s, because of automation, you also have more cars, right? More cars are coming off the assembly line. What does that allow us to do?
You have to drive to your job.
Yeah, you're able to drive to your job. How many of your parents work in downtown Denver or tech center or outside of Highlands Ranch? How many of you live in Highlands Ranch? It's all because of this idea that we have cars, we're able to travel to our job, but we want to live somewhere else. So We have suburbia. This concept comes up where we can actually build houses that are miles away from where we work because we can drive to where we work now. So we can be in the big city to do our job, but we can go home to our family in the quiet neighborhood with parks and less crime.
An actual space.
Yeah, there's a little bit of space there too, right? You're not living in skyscrapers. So if you're in suburbia, what kinds of things are different from the big city? Yeah,
More family homes.
family homes. A lot of your neighbors are kind of in the same place, right? They're the middle class, usually a suburb. And this idea of conformity comes up. What is conformity?
Being like the rest. Sticking to a symbol.
Yeah, so if you're in your neighborhood with all of these houses that are built exactly the same, because it's cheaper to build houses that are exactly the same, you start conforming to the culture of your neighborhood, right? So even though things might seem kind of lame in Highlands Ranch, like, man, all the houses are the same, you know. Highlands Ranch does have its own culture, believe it or not. Like, the culture in Highlands Ranch is going to be different than the culture in Inglewood or the culture in Aurora. But you're all conforming to that idea within your own neighborhood. So some of the first like cookie cutter housing suburbs were made by a company called Levy, Levitt. And so the first suburban communities were called Levy towns. Again, that's Levitt towns. So they were just kind of the first company to start with this idea. So if things are really good, they're prospering. What was prospering? Yeah. Okay, so along with suburbs, middle class, conformity, you also have consumerism. Why is consumerism important? First off, what is consumerism? Yeah. Buying, purchasing, going out shopping. So if you're in an economic boom, you have a lot of money, what are you going to do?
Save it.
Austin's going to save his money, everybody else is going to spend it, right? So everybody lives in the same kind of house. How do you make yourself better than your neighbor?
By what things you have.
Yeah. So no one wants to be the same, right? Yeah, you're conforming, but at the same time, you also want to think of yourself as being better. So you go out and buy stuff. You buy new appliances. You buy toys. You buy TVs, cars. All of this stuff is the idea of consumerism. Your clothes are different. It's all about how do you set yourself apart from others? How do you make yourself seem more affluent, right? So, before the 1950s, cooking and conserving food, all that stuff is totally different when you didn't have appliances. What the appliances allow you to do, now you can go to the market, you can buy your food, and you can keep it for a future meal. So you have refrigerators, ovens, all that stuff came up in the 1950s. You also had a fashion boom. So during World War II, everybody's rationing, right? Everybody's conserving money, conserving products for the war effort. All the men are off to war. Everything is being put into the economy for the war, not for consumerism. But once the war ends, that money can now go to entertainment. It can go to fashion. When you're rationing fabric for uniforms, now that fabric becomes the fashion world, right? You make different prints of dresses. And you have like new toys like the Barbie doll, which you could accessorize. It came in different variations. Marilyn Monroe becomes kind of this fashion icon, right? She has the makeup, the big blonde hair, just kind of the quintessential model, if you will. So more consumerism. We talked about how you have more cars. What kinds of cars do you want? Do you want the same type of car as everyone else, or do you want a cool looking car?
Cool looking.
Yeah, right? It used to be, like, back with the original assembly line, like the Model T Ford, everybody can have the same one and it comes in black. 1950s, now you can have different types of cars, and you can have cars that have fins on them, cars that go fast, right? So like Chevy made the Corvair in the 50s, and they wanted a car that was made for teenagers, young men who wanted to go fast and wanted to look cool doing it. And they also maybe didn't want to spend as much money. So what Chevy does is they produce the Corvair, which is really cool, it's really fast, but it's also not very safe. And eventually there is a backlash because people are getting killed in the Corvair, and government regulations come in and try to make cars safer. But initially, they don't care about the safety, they care about being cool. You also have kind of the start of commercial air travel in the 50s. People aren't just flying to go off to war, they're now flying for vacation. You have kind of that pink collar job of flight attendants coming up. It's all kind of glamorous. You know, in the 50s, people still looked up to see a plane. If they heard one come over, be like, oh, there's a plane, right? I don't know if anyone else does that now. I do it if it's a jet, but not like a regular plane, right?
If you can hear it, yeah. Like if it's
Fair enough.
something low flying.
Yeah, fair enough. So you have cars. You also have, how does that impact dining?
Fast food.
Fast food, right? It used to be, before the 1950s, people didn't really go out to eat very much. Has anybody ever been to a restaurant that didn't have a menu? So I had never been to one either until I moved to Kansas. And like in rural Kansas, there are actually restaurants where you go and they just have one meal that they serve for the day. And they don't have a menu. You just kind of, you eat what they serve you, right? Well, that's because they're in rural Kansas. They don't have the city, the suburbs. But when you do have the city and the suburbs, you can start making menus with different types of food that's always kind of the same. You know, you go to McDonald's, you know what to expect, right? Quarter pounder, Big Mac, fries. All that stuff is because people are now able to move easier, and you gotta bring food to people in the suburbs. Because not everybody lives on a farm anymore, right? And it also became kind of a cool thing with these drive-ins. Now you can show off your car, right? If you have a big hot rod, or a Corvette or something like that, you can actually show off and be like, yeah, look at me, right? You got the guy rolling up in the hot rod, he's got the cigarettes in his shirt, picking up on the chicks, right? Oh yeah, I can totally see Vaughn doing that. And so yeah, like McDonald's, that starts in the 1950s. Has anybody seen the movie yet? I don't know if it's out yet, about McDonald's. No, it's a movie with Michael Keaton. The founder.
Wait, what movie?
The founder. The founder, yeah. Yeah, I think it comes out this weekend maybe. But be interesting to see how, because it tells the story of how the American economy pushed a franchise like McDonald's. Okay. So also in the 1950s, we had a lot of pop culture, right? We always have pop culture. Rock and roll comes up. Who's the king of rock and roll? Yvonne again? Elvis Presley, right? So on number 8, I think it is, it says from the waist up, change up to down. So Elvis Presley, can anybody volunteer to do the Presley for me?
No, Austin. You have
dance.
You have.
Oh.
You have the hair.
So right, he had the hips, right, and as he had the guitar. So in the 50s, because they're concerned about, you know, being clean and all that kind of stuff, the cameras wouldn't show Elvis from the waist down. They would just show him from the waist up, so that you couldn't see his hips moving, right? But because of, what is rock and roll, first off?
You rock and then you roll.
Like the cultural identity of rock and roll, is that really proper and formal? Nonconformist. It's rebellion, right? And so in the 50s, we have this new concept come up. You know that until the 1950s, the word teenager wasn't in the dictionary?
What they called it.
They were adolescents. They were not married, they're kids. But in the 50s, you have adolescents who actually feel like they have rights. And
That's weird.
that they can go out and get a license and drive around and be an adult. And so that's this idea of this teenager, this rebel. Like, this person isn't even married and they have a job and they think they're too cool for school, right? So you got this guy. Does anybody know who that is?
Kurt Cobain.
It's not Kurt Cobain.
Literally.
You're a few decades off there.
Kurt Cobain.
Spider-Man's friend?
Yeah, that's
Oh, true. Did you just?
James Franco.
James
Yeah.
Franco?
Jimi Hendrix.
Okay.
It's not Jimmy Hendrix.
So this is James Dean. And James Dean is the rebel without a cause.
So he led the movement.
So he led the beat movement, which is kind of another rebel thing. It's kind of the first rebel movement before like the hippie movement is the beats. But yeah, James Dean, he was in the movie Rebel Without a Cause. And if you're a teenager in the 50s and you're a guy, he's your hero. Like, he's the guy you want to be like. All the girls love him. All the guys want to be him, right? He's got his red jacket, his cigarette, and he's just, I don't care what any adult told me, I'm going to do what I'm going to do, right?
Man, where are his parents?
Does anybody think of somebody like that today? I was trying to think of kind of a celebrity today that